A true story that's more terrifying than thrilling. Set on the highest peak on Earth, this wasn't just a mountain expedition, it was a fight to stay alive, where a single mistake could turn into death and every breath came at a price. Into Thin Air isn't just about snow, storms, and Everest. It's a story of human spirit, ambition, greed, and regret. Into Thin Air, the true story of an Everest tragedy. Introduction. Have you ever wondered what it must feel like to reach the highest point on Earth, Mount Everest? From afar, it looks like a dream. But the reality is far more brutal. This isn't a cinematic climb. Every fourth person who attempts this summit never returns. Into Thin Air isn't just a book. It's Jon Krakauer's most terrifying and true personal story. In the 1996 Everest expedition, Jon himself got caught in a deadly snowstorm. He survived, but 8 others were lost forever, buried beneath the ice. In this book, Jon recounts the pain, the fear, and the courage he witnessed with his own eyes. He had gone as a journalist, reporting for Outlook magazine. But what happened there changed his life forever. May 10th, 1996, standing on the summit of Everest. For me, Everest wasn't just a mountain, it was a dream. And when I reached the top that day, at 29,028 feet, it felt like time froze. Only clouds around me, silence, and the sound of my own heartbeat. But the joy lasted only 5 minutes. Because at that altitude, oxygen is dangerously low. Staying longer is a gamble between life and death. Coming down was the real challenge. I hadn't slept in 57 hours. I don't even remember when I last ate. And my worsening cough made things worse. I was with 2 teams. One was an American commercial expedition, the other based in New Zealand. I'd reached just behind Anatoly Bukreev. He was with the American team, while I was part of the New Zealand one, the Hillary Step, and the dangerous traffic jam. While descending, I reached the narrow and steep section called Hillary Step, and what I saw was terrifying. Around a dozen climbers were lined up, waiting to climb using a single rope. At that altitude, delays mean one thing: the risk of running out of oxygen. And why was there a traffic jam? Because 3 teams were attempting the summit at the same time. My team, led by Rob Hall, Scott Fisher's team, and a team from Taiwan. In the crowd, I spotted Yasuko Namba, a member of my team. She was 47 years old, about to become the oldest woman to climb Everest. Behind her was Doug Hansen, and finally Scott Fisher, but the real storm was still ahead. By the time I reached the south summit, it was 3 p.m. The weather was getting worse, but we had no idea that within hours, Everest would witness one of its deadliest storms in history. I changed to a second oxygen cylinder and began my descent. But the storm was so brutal, even the rescue team had to abandon efforts to retrieve all the bodies. Some survived, some died trying to save others, and some saw things that may never leave their memories. Dehradun, India, 1852 altitude, 29,028 feet. The year was 1852, and the place, Dehradun. A survey clerk rushed into the office of India's Surveyor General, Andrew Waugh, with a piece of news that would go down in history. He reported that a Bengali mathematician and surveyor had discovered the highest mountain peak in the world without ever climbing it, purely through calculations. Imagine that. In an era with no GPS, no satellites, an Indian mind had calculated the exact height of Mount Everest. During the British Raj, such human calculators were referred to as computers, and the peak we now call Everest was named in honor of Sir George Everest, the Surveyor General who preceded Andrew Waugh. A 100-year battle. For one summit, once it was confirmed that this was the tallest peak on Earth, it became the ultimate challenge for mountaineers across the world. But this mountain wasn't easy to conquer. 15 expeditions failed, 24 people lost their lives, and it took nearly 101 years for a human to finally reach the top. British teams initially attempted the climb from the Tibetan side because Nepal had shut its borders to foreigners. But in 1948, when Tibet became a part of China, that route closed too. Then in 1949, Nepal opened its borders to the world for the first time. And that marked the beginning of the real Everest mission. 1953. the day humanity touched the sky. On the third attempt, a British mission approached from Nepal's side. The team included Edmund Hillary, a mountaineer from New Zealand Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa, an experienced mountain guide. At 9 a.m., they crossed the south summit. An hour later, they reached the Hillary Step, where Hillary climbed Kayuru using ropes. On May 29, 1953, they made history. They became the first humans to set foot on the summit of Mount Everest. Everest, no longer just a dream, but a trend. After that, it was as if a race had begun. People wanted to climb Everest at any cost. Due to the extreme altitude, unpredictable weather, and serious risk, the Nepalese government raised the climbing permit fees to limit unnecessary crowds. But that didn't stop people's obsession. 1995, when I got the call. In March 1995, I got a call from Mark Bryant, editor of Outside Magazine. He said, "We need someone to cover a commercial Everest expedition. A team leaves in 5 days. Can you make it to base camp?" My assignment was simple. Go to base camp, report, and return. But base camp? Since childhood, I had dreamed of standing on top of Mount Everest, so I asked him, "Can you postpone the trip by a year? So I can prepare to climb myself?" And maybe he sensed the passion in my voice. He said yes. In February 1996, I got another call. He told me that Rob Hall's team had a spot for me, and now I was ready to meet Mount Everest face to face. Over northern India, March 19th, 1996, 30,000 feet above sea level. I was in the sky, flying over northern India, as my real journey toward Mount Everest was just about to begin. Facting. March 31st, 1996, 9,186 feet. At Kathmandu Airport in Nepal, I met Andy Harris for the first time. He was a part of Rob Hall's guide team. I was staying in a hotel in Tamil, right in the heart of the city. And soon after arriving, I met the man who made it possible for me to be part of this mission. Rob Hall. Rob, born in New Zealand, was just an ordinary boy who had dropped out of school. While working at a company called Alp Sports, he discovered his passion for the mountains. He had previously summited Everest with Peter Hillary, the son of Sir Edmund Hillary, and by now he had already led 39 people to the top of the world. After 2 days in Kathmandu, we headed to Tribhuvan Airport to catch a flight to Lukla, where I met the rest of the team. Helen Wilton, base camp manager Caroline McKenzie, a Dr. Lou Kasishke, a lawyer Yasuko Namba, Japanese climber Beck Weathers, pathologist Stuart Hutchison, cardiologist Frank Fishbeck, a publisher, John Task, the oldest team member. But the strongest bond I formed was with Doug Hansen, who had already attempted Everest with Rob Hall in 1995. Our first night of the trek was spent in Pakting village, from where the climb toward Namche Bazaar began. There I met Mike Groom, a climber who had lost both his big toes during a Kanchenjunga ascent. Eventually, we reached Lobuje, just 7 miles from base camp. Then came bad news. A young Sherpa had fallen into a deep crevasse. His condition was critical. We had to pause the climb. Rob Hall wasn't someone who took risks lightly. He valued every life, whether climber or Sherpa. Lobuje, April 8th, 1996, 16,200 feet. Everest Base Camp. April 12th, 1996, 17,600 feet. Just before reaching base camp, we heard Rob's voice on the radio. "Climb starts tomorrow morning." I felt nervous inside. And that's when my cough began. I was sharing a tent with Andy Harris. He looked exhausted and dehydrated. Helen told him to stay back, but he was stubborn. "I'll go with base camp no matter what." Each of us climbed at our own pace, and we reached base camp. The nights there were suffocating. I often woke up gasping for air. Like I couldn't breathe. This was Doug Hansen's second attempt at Everest. The first time, he had to turn back just 330 feet below the summit because Rob insisted on safety. The turnaround time was 2 p.m. Compared to the rest, I had less experience with high altitudes. Still, Rob Hall trusted me. He said, "After 3 climbs up and down, your body will adapt to this altitude." The full team had 26 members, including Sherpas. The plan was to establish 4 camps above and gradually move forward. Khumbu Glacier and icefall April 13th, 4:45 a.m. And now, the deadly Khumbu Glacier lay ahead, with deep, dangerous crevasses everywhere, while wobbly ladders laid across them. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it myself. By 8:30 a.m., I was at the top of the icefall. Rob had clearly warned us. No one stays beyond 10 a.m., or the afternoon sun will make the ice unstable. Thankfully, everyone reached on time. I went to rest in my tent, and when I heard Helen's voice, "Linda's on the call." It was my wife, Linda, calling through satellite phone. She had once been a climber herself, but an injury forced her to stop. At the airport, when she said goodbye, her eyes were filled with fear. She said, "If you don't return, a part of me will remain incomplete." And I had replied, "Don't be afraid, I will come back." Part 3, April 13th, 1996, Camp 1, 19,500 feet. There were many people who had reached the heights of Mount Everest, despite having little or no real mountaineering experience. Some had never even stepped foot on a mountain before. I never considered myself an expert either, but in this crowd I saw many faces that looked like they were living in a dream. Some were lucky enough to reach the summit, while others were forced to turn back before they ever got close. On the morning of April 13th, we began the climb back to Camp 1. By then, a Taiwanese group had also arrived. They looked professional from the outside, but they lacked the technical skills required to navigate the glacier. We were concerned. If they got caught in a storm, we'd be the ones responsible for saving them. And they weren't the only ones. There were a few solo climbers too, trying to ascend dangerous paths without any guides or teams. After this trip to Camp 1, we took a 2-day break at base camp to let our bodies rest. By now, I could feel my body slowly adjusting to the thin, oxygen-deprived air. When we reached the main Camp 1 site, I met a powerful Sherpa named Ang Dorje. He was trying to set up tents on frozen ice. I helped him, but within minutes, I was breathless. The other Sherpas laughed and said, "This is just the beginning. Wait until you feel the real thin air higher up." As we moved toward Camp 2, the cold grew harsher and the wind more biting. The temperature had dropped below freezing and the path ahead was lost in mist. That's when we saw something wrapped in blue plastic. I looked closely and froze. It was a body lying peacefully in the snow. That night, I asked Rob Hall about it. He replied, "He was a Sherpa who died on this mountain 3 years ago." The next day, during a short walk, I saw another body. These were climbers who had been lying in the ice for over a decade, untouched, unchanged. April 22nd. We returned to base camp from Camp 2. As soon as I arrived, I saw Rob, Dr. Caroline, and Ingrid Hunt, the doctor from Scott Fisher's team, talking while pointing toward the mountains. I soon learned that Ngawang Topshe, one of Scott Fisher's Sherpas, was gravely ill. Many Sherpa men hide their illnesses because if they're seen as weak, they risk being blacklisted from future expeditions. Scott told Ngawang to descend, but he ignored the warning and kept going toward Camp 2. His coughing had worsened, now accompanied by blood. He was suffering from high-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE, a condition where fluid begins to fill the lungs. While Rob Hall's team was organized and united, Scott's team was scattered. Ngawang had only 4 people with him and no guide. All night, oxygen was administered to him. For a while, he seemed stable, but by morning, his condition deteriorated again. Another Sherpa still refused to accept that he had HAPE. Ngawang began vomiting uncontrollably, his face turned blue, and then he went into cardiac arrest. Ingrid, risking her life, gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After 10 minutes, his pulse returned and he was airlifted to a hospital below. He was still fighting, but his body had already given up. And just a few weeks later, Ngawang Topche passed away. Part 4, April 28th to 30th, 1996. Camp 2 to Lhotse Face, 21,300 to 23,400 feet. Just a few days earlier, we had completed the grueling ascent from Camp 1 to Camp 2. The next target, Camp 3. It was barely 4 a.m. and we had to leave by 4:45. The cold had seeped deep into our bones. I wasn't hungry at all, but forced myself to eat a candy bar and sip some tea just to get moving. Just as we were about to head out, Rob's voice crackled on the radio. Strong winds, weather turning fast, everyone returned to Camp 2. We turned back, reaching Camp 2 by afternoon. Doug was still not with us. Before coming to Nepal, he'd undergone a throat surgery and wasn't fully recovered. Even talking was painful for him. What hurt him more than the physical pain was the thought that he might fail to summit Everest again. I looked at him, defeated, restless, broken. I felt a deep ache for my friend. Camp 2 echoed with the howling of cold winds and rising tensions among the mission leaders. Who would fix the ropes? Who would lead the teams up? Finally, it was agreed that each team would send 2 members to fix ropes, but the South African team outright refused. Their leader even lashed out at Rob. The Taiwanese team at least apologized, but the South African leader crossed the line. Everyone except Doug began preparing for Camp 3. We descended once again to base camp, where the air felt a bit thicker now. The body was adjusting. But my cough still hadn't stopped. Rob Hall gave us the final word. May 10th, the summit push. The same date was chosen by Scott Fisher's team. May 6th, base camp, 17,600 feet. May 9th, Camp 3, 24,000 feet. May 10th, Southeast Ridge, 27,600 feet. On May 6th, we set off again. The summit was now within reach. At Camp 2, Scott Fisher was instructing his lead guide, Anatoly Bukrev. Stay with the group, take care of everyone. But Bukrev seemed to ignore it. He reached the last client 5 hours late, and when team member Clev Schuning passed out from altitude sickness, Bukrev was nowhere to be found. Tensions between Scott and Bukrev were no longer hidden. Scott, frustrated and exhausted, finally made a call to Seattle to complain to his business partner. No one knew. This would be Scott's final call. On May 8th, we climbed toward Lhotse. Everyone was handed oxygen masks and cylinders. Rob Hall trained us through the night. Up here, every second counts. Oxygen keeps your brain alive. Without it, your neurons begin to die. But the mask felt suffocating. I pulled it off. Sleep vanished, replaced by a deep unease. Around 1 a.m., we reached the South Col, the last camp before the summit. Sherpas were setting up tents. The weather was again turning grim. Doug now looked better. This time he had made up his mind. I'm not stopping now. By 7:30 p.m., Rob Hall made the call. We're starting the summit push. He gave us a firm warning. From now on, my word is law. That was his leadership, and we followed without question. Ahead of us now lay the death zone. Death zone, above 8,000 meters, where every breath is a bargain with death. We still had oxygen tanks, but they'd only last 4 to 5 hours. Every step, every minute was a fight to slow down death. By 1:30 p.m. on May 10th, Rob Hall's team reached the south summit. At that altitude, the body was starting to give up. Yasuko Namba, more anxious than I'd ever seen her, looked like she couldn't waste a second. The ropes weren't fully fixed yet, but Yasuko impatiently started climbing. The guides had to shout at her. A single misstep could be fatal. The weather, the conditions, the crowd, everything was beginning to spin out of control. Everyone was climbing using the same rope. And Everest, cold, towering, unforgiving, was ready to test each one of us. May 10th, 1996, 1:12 p.m. altitude, 29,028 feet. In my backpack, I had a banner from my magazine and a small flag that my wife, Linda, had embroidered with a lizard. It was my dream that when I finally stood atop the world's highest peak, I'd take a photo with them. But in reality, when we reached the top, I was so busy taking photos of others, I completely forgot to take one of myself. And anyway, who had time to linger there? Spending more than 5 minutes on the summit could be deadly. There was something about the weather. It felt like a storm was about to break. But my mind was focused on only one thing: oxygen. I started descending quickly and reached the Hillary Step. There, several climbers were waiting for a single rope. I asked Andy to turn off my regulator to save oxygen, but he accidentally opened the valve instead. And within just 10 minutes, all of my oxygen was gone. It felt like someone had thrown a heavy blanket of sleep over me. As I stumbled downward, I came across Yasuko Namba, still moving up toward the summit, full of courage. Then I saw Rob Hall leading everyone, I gave him a glance of gratitude for guiding us all on this journey. As I moved toward the south summit, someone suddenly shouted, "All the oxygen bottles are gone!" My heart sank. Just then, I spotted Mike Groom. He had previously descended from the summit without oxygen. He offered me his bottle. Thank God, or survival would have been impossible at that height. When I reached the south summit, I saw 6 bottles still left. But Andy didn't believe it. His regulator wasn't working, and he had developed hypoxia. He wasn't in his senses anymore. I left the south summit well before Mike, Yasuko, and Andy. It was 3:30 p.m. and snowfall had begun. When I got to a place known as the balcony, I saw Beck Weathers sitting alone, shivering. He had recently undergone eye surgery and couldn't see clearly. Rob had told him to descend, but he said he'd wait until sunlight hit him directly. I tried convincing him too. But when he heard Mike was also on his way, he refused to come down with me. Meanwhile, my oxygen was running out again. At that altitude, with hypoxia setting in, the mind starts hallucinating. Voices, shadows, the sense that someone is walking beside you. I started experiencing the same. But somehow, dragging myself step by step, I reached Camp 4. I was so exhausted, I couldn't even feel my body anymore. But I was alive. I had climbed Mount Everest. The dream I'd carried since childhood had come true. The next morning, May 11th, 6 a.m., Sitsakrins, South Col, 26,000 feet. Now I was at Camp 4, waiting for the rest of the team to return. The entire camp was haunted by one question. Are the others still alive? Neil Bedelman, another guide, was stranded above, and he didn't even have a radio. Rob, Mike, and Yasko had already radioed in from the summit and sent a message to Helen at base camp. I'm waiting for Doug, then I'll come down. Don't worry. But Doug and Scott Fisher both were late. Doug summited at 4 p.m., 2 hours too late. The turnaround time was supposed to be 2 p.m. Fisher was already exhausted. But he didn't tell anyone. Yasuko's oxygen had run out. She sat down and said, "I can't take even one more step." Mike tried to remove her mask, but she refused. She couldn't believe her tank was empty. At that moment, the storm above turned into a full-blown blizzard. 19 people were now missing. The rescue mission failed. Mike somehow dragged himself down. His face looked like death itself. The first thing he said was, "Send help for Beck and Yasko." Meanwhile, Andy Harris was missing. By morning, it was discovered that he wasn't in his tent. I went to the place where I'd last seen him. Then came a shocking realization. The person I had told everyone was Andy was actually Martin Adams, which meant I never saw Andy that night at all. So where did Andy Harris go? Was he still alive somewhere? Or had death quietly claimed him in the icy silence of Everest? Even today, his story remains unfinished, a mystery. Summit, May 10th, 1996, 3:40 p.m. Altitude, 29,028 feet, Mount Everest. Scott Fisher had finally reached the summit, but his condition was already critical. There, he met his lead Sherpa, Lopsang Jangbu. Lopsang offered him some tea, and Scott took off his oxygen mask, even though oxygen was still available. That single sip of tea was like a deep breath before death. Meanwhile, Rob Hall was waiting for his client, Doug Hansen, at the top. To this day, people still wonder, should Rob have turned Doug back in time? Maybe. But the truth was far more complicated. Doug had failed once before, and this time he wanted to reach the summit at any cost, because Rob himself had encouraged him to try again. And now? How could Rob deny him? Doug's oxygen had run out during the ascent. There were 2 cylinders at the south summit, but Andy Harris mistakenly said the oxygen was gone. Maybe he himself was hypoxic, confused due to lack of oxygen. Mike Groom overheard the conversation and tried to clarify, but fate intervened. His radio stopped working. At the Hillary step, things took a turn for the worse. Bringing Doug down wasn't easy, and Rob was left with no real options. Somewhere along the route, Lopsang encountered Andy Harris. Andy requested him to carry more oxygen up, even offering money, but Lopsang refused. He had his own team's responsibility to bear. But Andy, he never turned back. Instead of saving himself, he chose to help Rob and Doug. That choice was his final act of courage. Meanwhile, Scott's condition had deteriorated badly. He started mumbling, and then shouting, "I'm going to jump off the mountain." Lopsang somehow tied him up with a rope and began bringing him down. On the way, they found Makalu Gao, barely conscious, unable to move. Lopsang tried to carry Scott, but he was too heavy. In the end, Lopsang had to leave him and go down for help. The next morning, May 11th, 1996, 4:43 a.m., Rob Hall reached the south summit alone. Doug was gone, Andy was gone. Rob radioed base camp, but he was talking strangely. He kept asking, "Where are my clients?" The doctors had to lie. "Andy is at base camp," they said. Rob simply replied, "Doug is gone." Doug's body was never found. Maybe he fell off the southwest face. What happened to Andy remains a mystery. Around 9 a.m., Rob finally removed the ice from his mask. 16 hours without gas at nearly 28,700 feet. A struggle beyond human limits. At 9:30 a.m., a few Sherpas reached him with oxygen and tea. 3 more Sherpas had gone to try to rescue Scott and Gao. Gao survived, but Scott's breathing was now barely there. The Sherpas understood it might already be too late. Rob's condition kept worsening. His friends tried to encourage him over the radio. "Hold on, try to move down." But what he said in return broke everyone's heart. "If I could walk, I would have come down 6 hours ago." 6:20 p.m., Rob spoke to his wife for the last time. He had eaten some snow, his mouth was dry, and then he said, "I love you. Don't worry. Go to sleep." That call was their final goodbye. After that, Rob was called again and again, but there was no response. A few hours later, he was found, lifeless, lying on freshly fallen snow. Breath trapped in ice. Tone starts with cold silence, then an unsettling twist, gradually sinking into grief, guilt, and a heavy but quiet ending. May 10th, 1996, 28,550 feet. May 11th, 7:30 a.m., South Col, 26,000 feet. May 12th, 9:45 a.m., Geneva Spur, 25,900 feet. May 13th, Everest Base Camp, 17,600 feet. 4 Sherpas set out to search for the bodies of Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba. They soon found 2 human figures, half buried in snow. First, they saw Namba, and then came a moment that took their breath away. Namba was still breathing. Just a few steps away, they found Beck's body. They brushed the snow off his face and discovered he too was alive. One hand was bare, no glove. His fingers were frozen stiff. Frostbite. The flesh had died. And yet, the Sherpas had to make an impossible choice. If we try to drag them down, we might lose the ones still alive. So they left them both behind, wrapped in a sheet of snow. But the story didn't end there. The next day, Beck regained consciousness, stumbling, crawling, staggering through the snow. He somehow made it back to his tent. He needed urgent medical help, and he had come back to life like a miracle. Beck's survival sparked a new hope. A second rescue team was sent for Scott Fisher, but by the time they reached him, his oxygen tank was empty. And Scott was gone. Those who survived made their way back to Camp 2, where doctors were waiting. Beck and Makalu Gao were flown to a hospital in Kathmandu. May 13th, when I finally reached base camp, I felt like I couldn't hold myself together. In memory of my friends, I cried like a child. So many were lost. Some would never return. At Kathmandu Airport, I met Yasuko Namba's husband and brother. There was something they wanted to know. A flicker of hope in their eyes, but I had no answers. Only a crushing silence. May 19th, I returned home. At the airport, I met Doug Hansen's partner and their 2 children. I handed over a few of Doug's belongings. That moment, I'll carry in my heart forever. Out of Rob Hall's team of 6, only 2 survived. Even now, I carry this deep regret that maybe I was somehow responsible for Andy's death. While Namba lay in the snow, caught between life and death, I was just 350 yards away in my tent, and I did nothing. For months, I was lost in depression. Every night, the same thought haunted me. I could have done something. I could have saved someone. But I didn't. Now I can say this with complete certainty. Reaching the summit is hard, but coming back alive, that's even harder. Conclusion: a true, breath-stealing tale. Into Thin Air is a personal account written by Jon Krakauer, a journalist who witnessed the disaster on Mount Everest firsthand. You've just heard how legendary guides like Rob Hall and Scott Fisher risked everything to help their clients summit, how some gave their lives to save others, and how, in the battle against death, some survived and some were lost forever. This isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror of human courage, weakness, regret, and hope. We'll meet again in the next episode of Book Blink with a new story. Until then, remember, sometimes the biggest battle isn't climbing to the top, it's coming back down, alive.